Today I wanted to show you some of the easy ways to take advantage of abundance in your backyard. And I often talk a lot about the edible plants, but there's also medicinal plants. So we are here in California, and our state flower is this gorgeousness. This is California poppy, Eschscholzia californica. Now this is a native plant in California, and it is our state flower. And so you do need to be careful. It's actually illegal to harvest this plant on public lands, but this is growing amongst all kinds of weedy flowers in this back area in my backyard. So I can harvest this, and this California poppy, oh, they are so incredibly beautiful. They've got this gorgeous, gorgeous flower. And once you get to know it, you see it has this flower. They generally have 4 petals. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they have these really finely dissected leaves. And the flowers, as they're forming, they have little caps on them, and they're nice and tall. These are some of the identifying characteristics. And then the little caps start coming off. These are actually what's called the calyx, or the sepals, and they start coming off. Ready? Whoop! And that will fall down, and now the flower will open with the sun. And then the flower gets pollinated. And then once it's pollinated, the petals fall off, and this is actually the ovary. Now, in order to make good medicine out of California poppy, this is in the poppy family, and it can absolutely be used for pain, but there are no opiates in this plant. So there will not be any, drug test dirtiness in any way from California poppy. And yet, it's still wonderful for pain. It's a really lovely calming herb for the central nervous system. And in order to get all the medicine of this plant, we want all parts. Now, oftentimes you really want to focus. If I'm going to get a root medicine, I want to get it when the plant is not in flower, because when the plant is in flower, in general, all the vitality is up in those flowers. And so often if I'm getting root medicine, I'll wait till it's not flowering. But this plant is a little bit different, and that I actually want all parts. I want the flowers, I want the seed heads, I want some unopened flowers, I want the root, and I want some of these leaves. So this is one of my absolute favorite harvesting tools ever. It's called a hori. And this is, basically it's a blade. It's got a sharp blade on this side and a toothed or serrated blade on this side. You've got the number, so it's really great for planting. What I really love is that it's made like a really good knife where the metal goes all the way through. So it's not going to break like most of your hand trowels will break. I can't tell you how many have broken on me. So when I'm harvesting a root, I want to basically go in, and I want to be really clear about what I'm harvesting. So I'm going to move some of these other things aside. And I'm basically just going to press down and move it back and forth. To another side, press down, move it back and forth. This is pretty compacted ground, so I'm just going to slowly work my way. I'm specifically trying to not disrupt the actual root. I just want to go around it and then wedge underneath it until I can pull the entire plant up. Oh, it's almost there. Ah, nice. So I actually have 2 small plants here, 1 little root here. Then here's another little plant with a little root. That's not quite enough, so I'm going to go ahead and get another one of these volunteers, because all of these are just volunteers. Moving it around. Little bit of a root. I think I'm going to get just a couple. Since these are small plants, I'm going to get a couple more. Oh, this is actually a double, so this might just do it. Oh, very nice, very nice. So now between all of these plants, I have 5 small plants, and we have all parts. I've got it pollinated. Here's a seed pod. I've got a bunch of flowers. I've got some unopened flowers. I have a bunch of leaves, and I have root. So now, because we are in the environment, I'm going to go ahead and fill in my holes. The reason I do that is because I recognize that there is a lot of life that is part of the mycelial network and the microbiome of the way that the earth communicates, and the sun beating down on those holes will actually cause some damage. And so I fill my holes back in. No matter what I'm doing, I always fill my holes back in because I recognize, especially here, that sun can get really hot and really drying. So now we're going to go over to our little processing area. I want to make this immediately into medicine. And so we're going to head over to our processing area. Okay, so here we are. You want to be prepared. Anytime you're making medicine, you want to be prepared as much as possible so that you can make the best medicine. And what I mean by that preparation is to have everything that you need ready to go. So here we have our table. I've got a bowl of water to be able to dunk my roots. I've got a defunct old toothbrush. This is specifically used for cleaning roots. Now, you don't have to have a electric toothbrush in order to clean, but I have found, I actually learned this from my friend Jessie. It was her idea, and we're cleaning all these roots, and it went so much faster than just, all my hand doing the work. So love that. And then I have my clippers to be able to cut it down. I've got my jar to put it in. I have my alcohol, and I have my labeling stuff. So I'm going to start with taking each one of these. I'm going to pull off any leaves that I don't want to use. That would be the yellowing ones. And then I'm just simply going to take my clippers and I'm going to cut the root. I'm going to toss that into the water, put this to the side. I'm just going to go ahead and do that with each one of these. Pull off the yellowing leaves that I don't want in my medicine. Now, a good thing to be aware of, actually I'll put that and put them all in the water all at once. A good thing to be aware of is, like I was saying, the legalities of, is it safe for you to harvest, but also is it legal for you to harvest? So as I mentioned, this is our state flower, and so technically it's a $1,500 fine in California for harvesting this plant off of public lands. But we're not on public lands. We're on private property. We're in my backyard. So I can totally harvest this, and it's absolutely fine. Now, if you live in somewhere, say, like Florida, this is actually considered a noxious weed. And even here, I actually have a friend who runs a farm, and they were asking, we work with them, we partner with them at Sage Country Herbs, and they were asking, oh, no, I want that over here, if I wanted them to plant anything for our field apprenticeship to be able to harvest. And I said, oh, would you plant some California poppy? And they said, you want me to plant a weed? And I said, yeah. And she said, no. And I said, okay, well, will you not pull the weeds until we're done harvesting? And she was like, oh yeah, I'll absolutely do that. Okay, so now I'm gonna take my little root. Oh, I was mentioning Florida as a noxious weed because when this is not a native plant, it's not, a lot of people don't want to see it. It pops up, it outcompetes other natives. And this is definitely a native plant. Now, one of the things I do want to point out with these roots is that there is a yellowish liquid, a yellowish latex that actually comes out of the roots. And so if it seems a little yellow or orange, that would actually be a really good thing. So a little shake in the water. Woo! Just getting the excess dirt off of it, and you can see a really lovely orange root comes out. Sometimes these roots can be bigger, sometimes they're going to be smaller. So California poppy is it's a lovely plant. It's really beautiful as a wildflower. I love that part of it. But as a medicine, it's also really good. It's not my favorite tasting tea, but I like to make tincture out of it, and tincture is an alcohol extract. So now I'm just gonna chop my roots up. And the thing to remember about chopping up plant matter is that the more surface area exposure to your solvent, the better. So your solvent could be water or alcohol, or some people work with glycerin or vinegar as solvents, but whatever solvent you're working with, the more surface area exposure, the better. So I'm going to call on my training in professional kitchens, and I'm going to finely chop these because I want to create more surface area for my solvent, in this case of alcohol. Alcohol is one of the stronger solvents for extraction. And while you can absolutely use this to make tea, because it's not a really aromatic herb, it's going to be not as enjoyable of a tea, and so having good tea formulation with it. I might combine this with things like chamomile, which is actually really lovely as a calming herb and has a nice flavor, perhaps a little bit of lavender, which is also going to accentuate the calming herb action, because lavender is a lovely calming herb as well. All right, so notice I don't have a lot of root. There's just a small amount of root, but that's okay because I'm going to be putting in a bunch of the rest of this. So I'm going to take all the flowers, the unopened flowers, the already pollinated flowers. I'm going to take all the leaves, and basically the main thing I'm not going to take is the real thick stems. I don't need the thick stems. Some of the thin stems are fine. This is kind of like chopping parsley. You're wanting those nice leaves, but I don't necessarily want the really fibrous stems, so I'll just put those to the side. It's really lovely to do this in the morning because, well, number one, these flowers actually open with the sun. They will open and close multiple times until they are pollinated. And so these flowers will stick around for sometimes days until they all get pollinated, and then they go to seed. And so the flowers open with the sun, and sometimes you can actually see areas, hillsides that are, kind of greenish in the early morning before the sun has come out. And then once the sun comes out, they turn a hue of orange that is absolutely amazing. If you're here in Southern California, if you have the opportunity, there is a California Poppy Preserve. It's in Antelope Valley, which is off of Highway 138. That's a beautiful one. There are so many California poppies at the California Poppy Preserve that when they're all in full flower, it looks like the hillsides are on fire because this color is so vibrant. It is absolutely mind-boggling how beautiful it is. And that's some of the things I am so incredibly thankful for and have a lot of gratitude, is to be able to recognize beauty in nature, because it's breathtaking when you allow it to be. When you acknowledge that the mere fact of these plants, especially things like California poppy, popping up in areas, get it, popping? Popping up in areas and really thriving, even in areas where there's not necessarily a lot going on nutritionally in the soil for it. These are fighter plants. These are survivor plants. All right. So now, once again, surface area. So I'm just going to gather all of this up. I'm going to call on my training from being in restaurants. I'm going to finely dice. And it becomes this gorgeous, it literally looks like a salad. It's just beautiful. Technically, you could just put the California poppy flowers into a salad. Technically, you could eat them. They're not super tasty, but you technically could eat them. All right. Oh, this is so pretty. So pretty. So now I'm just going to scoop all of this. Ideally, this is actually too big of a jar. I will be... I overshot on the size of my jar. So ideally if I'm making a fresh plant tincture, I want my jar to be 3/4 to full. And the reason for that is because there is a lot of water still in this plant. So I want this to be 3/4 to full, because when you dry plants, you often lose something like 70 to 90% of the actual, oh, I need a very smaller amount. You lose 70 to 90% of the weight of that plant. So if I start out with 100 grams of a fresh plant, then I would probably, when I dry it, end up with something like 10 to 30 grams of a plant, depending on how much fiber it has and how much weight it has. So when I'm using a fresh plant, I recognize that it has all of that, that it will take up a lot more volume in my jar as a dry plant would. So I'm going to fill my jar 3/4 to full. In this case, this is significantly larger than what I need. And so my fantastic husband, thank you so much, because really this is the size jar that I need. So we're just gonna dump all of this in. And one of the coolest things, I'm going to take so this is perfect, absolutely perfect. I'm about 3/4 to full. There's a little bit left in this old jar, so I'm just gonna pour some of my solvent in. I'm gonna put the lid on, I'm gonna swirl it around. I hate waste, so I always wanna make sure that I'm not leaving any, and quite frankly, I wanna honor the plant and not leave any little bits behind. All right, so this is 67.5%. Technically, you could do this in just vodka, which would be 40%. Basically, when making a tincture, it ranges from about 30 to 40%, all the way up to 95%. Now, oops, oh, that's the wrong one. Now, when it comes to fresh plants, because fresh plants have water in them, that is going to dilute my alcohol. And so I don't want to use 30%, because you want at least 20 to 30% alcohol in order to have preservation. So with a fresh plant, I'm not going to use 30%. You could absolutely use 40%. But in this case, because I know that this has water, I know because we actually water all the weeds in our backyard, we water regularly. And so I am going to use a little bit higher, in 67.5%. The reason I chose that particular number is because the math is actually easy. I take my vodka and I take my 95%, I combine them together at the exact same amount. So that means that I can add 95 plus 40 equals 135. You divide that by 2, and that equals 67.5% alcohol is my final total of what I'm starting with. So it's not actually having to do a lot of math to figure out my percentage. Now, you absolutely, the math is not all that difficult. You can do an 80%, you can do a 60%. There are some teachers like, oh, I missed one little flower. One of my teachers, Michael Moore, would say that all fresh plants should be 95% alcohol in order to make a tincture, because the 95% alcohol is dehydrating. It literally is breaking cell walls of a fresh plant. But I'm using my knife, and that's why I finally diced everything. And so I'm physically breaking those cell walls, and then I'm using a little bit lower alcohol. Now, the final part of this is that you must label. If you get into making things regularly, you think you'll remember, and you won't. Once you have numerous bottles around, you have to label. It's so incredibly important. Personally, I like to put both the scientific name, Eschscholtzia californica. I'm going to put the common name, California poppy. I'm going to put the date, and I'm going to put the percentage of alcohol that I have used, 67.5%. I really love to work with painter's tape. It's not professional labeling, but this is only going to be on here for about a month. This is called a folk method of maceration. Maceration is the act of cutting up plants, putting them in a jar, and putting in your alcohol and shaking it so that they can soak. This is a very basic way of making a tincture. Anybody can do it. It doesn't require a bunch of math. And the thing is that after about a month, I'm going to strain this, and I can just take my painter tape label and peel it off, leaving no sticky residue, and put it on my new jar that will have the strained tincture in it. And now it's ready to go. So here's my California poppy tincture. Get a little bit closer so you can see the gorgeousness. Isn't it so beautiful? See all the, got the green leaves with the orange flowers. It's just beautiful. Make sure that that lid is really clean so that you get a good seal. And because if there's any little plant matter on there, when you shake it, and you should shake it every day, because that's really helping to move the solvent around the herb. But if it's not sealed well, when you shake it, you'll get dribbles. And then when you set it down, you'll get stains around the base. So good lid with a good seal. Make sure it's nice and clean. Shake it on a regular basis. And now, in about a month, even 2 weeks, you will have California poppy medicine that can be used in small amounts, basically like anywhere from 15 drops to a half teaspoon, which would be about 60 drops. It's going to help to relax your stressed mind, relax your body. Really good in times when we're all dealing with a lot of stress, especially stress that is ongoing, so you don't realize what the impacts of it manifesting are. So having these allies like your chamomile tea, a little California poppy tincture, maybe you're dealing with overthinking before going to bed and you can't fall asleep, it's a perfect time for California poppy. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you find some medicine in your backyard to play with.